tonight. I'm going to do some general remarks on the commercial study, and then Ruth's going to do the heavy lift on the RPZ part. So we both work at Seattle Department of Transportation, so we regulate the parking that's in the city's public right-of-way, so street parking. This is SDOT's mission, vision, and core values. If you've been to another SDOT presentation, you've probably seen it, but we see parking management is really key about balancing. There's so many different users wanting and needing access for short-term parking, deliveries, pickups, parking near their house. So we work through our parking programs to balance the demand for parking we have, given we've got a fixed amount of parking and a lot of people that want to use it. There you go. So, like I said, Ruth's going to do most of the time on the RPZ requests and study restricted parking zones again. They're a little unique as far as parking management tools go in the city, in that RPZs are requested by neighborhoods and are installed with basically neighborhood support. So we really want to spend time going through a lot of the details on that study and what we found and sort of which areas it might make sense for. And hear from you all, like, what do you think about some of these concepts? So we'll leave a lot of time for questions and discussion. If we get to it, we did like 5 or 6 different parking access studies in September of this year. We shared a number of those with the West Seattle Merchants Association a couple months ago, but if you saw the West Seattle blog, kind of the takeaway was that where there are time limits and when they're in effect on street, they're actually working pretty well. Like, some blocks are kind of full. The next block often has parking. The parking conditions on street, at least in the commercial area, are not full enough to warrant paid parking. But what we will be looking at is some of these blocks have redeveloped, and you now have businesses at the ground level. And we generally prioritize short-term parking, so filling in a couple time limits on a few streets, unpaid time limits. And looking right around here, there is kind of a squeeze point about 6 or 7 p.m. where parking is most full. Looking right in the heart of the neighborhood, extending the unpaid time limits that end at 6 until 8. So if there's a lot of residents that live there, hopefully they would not take use of that parking when they come home at 4, because then they could park for the rest of the night, but to keep parking a little more available on street for folks coming into the business district. And so with that, I think Ruth's going to talk about RPZs, and we'll have some discussion there, and if we have time, we can go into some other studies. This presentation will be online tomorrow. There'll be a URL at the back, so it'll all be online tomorrow, and previous presentations are online too if you want to go look up more information.
Hi, thanks for coming. So I want to talk a little bit about the RPZ program, and some of you may have already heard some of this, so I'll go fairly quickly. First, there are things that the RPZ program are intended to do and not intended to do. The RPZ program first started in 1979 around the University of Washington. And the purpose of the program is really to prevent long-term commuter parking and allow parking for short-term visitors and residents. Curb space is a limited public resource, and so RPZs help to balance the needs of different people who want to use the same public space. Because it's public, restricting the use of the curb does require a compelling reason, and the RPZ program does not manage demand, though, between residents. So all residents living in an RPZ are eligible for permits. The program does not distinguish between renters or homeowners, between someone who's been there for 30 years or someone who's been there for 30 days. So those are some basic things about the program.
Yeah, I'm not sure about what that is exactly, but do you have to buy these permits?
You do have to buy a permit.
A resident who lives there would have to buy their...
That's
right.
That's correct. So, and here's the slide that actually talks to that. So, and as Jonathan said, residents request an RPZ, so the city doesn't proactively come and put one in. But signs like this, you may have seen around the city. They are installed directly adjacent to residences in a zone, and residences in that zone can buy permits that exempt them from those time limits, allowing them to park for up to 72 hours, which is a citywide time limit restriction. So the curb space is public, however, so non-permitted vehicles can generally still park, but are restricted to 2 hours when the zone is in effect. Each household can purchase up to 4 decal permits. That means that you would have to have 4 vehicles that are registered to that RPZ eligible address. So most households in the city by far have either 1 or 2 permits, not 4. Each household can also purchase a guest permit, which is a hang tag, and that can be used by visitors, or a contractor someone coming to your house. Each permit is currently $65 for 2 years. So the RPZ program, it's a cost center, and it generates revenue only to cover program costs such as sign installation and the materials and the administration of the program. So it does not run a surplus. It does not make money. And then also, though we do have a very, very, like 5 more very small employee permit program, there would likely not be permits available for the employees of the business district in the junction. And then one other thing is that zones can be expanded. Existing zones, they can grow. The residents of the next block contiguous can petition in if the circumstances are right. So an RPZ zone can change. Yep.
So just to, maybe in plain language, for the top bullets, it permits exempt residents from time limits. So if these were put up, so if anyone who works here all day but they don't live here, they couldn't park on these blocks longer than 2 hours, or if they were driving here to catch a bus, they couldn't park on those blocks longer than 2 hours.
Could they buy a permit?
No, the employees would likely not be able to buy a permit. So the permits are really just for residents.
And Ruth,
Mm-hmm.
are you guys considering reducing the number of permits per household to maybe 2?
Can we talk about that later?
Sure.
That's a great question. So I want to try to move through this, and I'm going to get to the results. So, but that I can talk a little bit about that. So this, just quickly, this is the general request process for new RPZs. The request comes from the community, which it came from you guys. We then do a quick determination to see whether or not you meet the minimum criteria to continue with the study. And then we do a detailed occupancy study, which I'm going to talk about. And then we do community outreach. So really, this is just a process slide. I'm not rushing through it. Okay. So here is the RPZ request that we got from you guys in January 2017. The original request area are the blocks shown in bright pink fuchsia, and they're just outside the commercial area, and the commercial area is outlined in blue. The RPZ program asks the residents to say, what is the generator? Why do you need this program? And you all told us that the generators are commuters who are coming to park and get on the bus, and also employees in the business district. And so those are 2 valid generators, and so we then proceeded with the study. So what we did is we ended up studying not just the request area, but also all the way around the commercial area. So that in this slide, the pink blocks were part of the RPZ study, and the blue blocks were part of commercial studies that Jonathan talked about. And in the residential study alone, there were 172 block faces, and a block face is just one side of one street. So we determined this area by conducting what's known as a windshield survey, and we did that in March of 2017. We drove the area, and we kept driving until the occupancy on the residential streets dropped off. And so what we ended up finding, the boundary of this was Dakota on the north, 46 on the west, Dawson on the south, and 36 on the east. And we did do this RPZ study in conjunction with the commercial study to kind of, what we wanted to do was get a holistic view of on-street parking demand in the area. So we did end up studying much more than what was originally requested. And we did this study last September. So how do we do a study? We do, we count on 4 days, we count on 2 days, a weekday and a Saturday, and we do 4 counts. And so the 4 a.m. count, we, not me, but others, record partial license plates. And so if the car is there at 4 a.m., it is considered to be a resident car, or a guest who could be using a permit as well. And so then we do a 10 a.m., a 2 p.m., and an 8 p.m. count. And that is how we determine residents versus non-residents. We don't run any license plates or anything like that. It's basically if the cars are there at 10 p.m., 10 a.m., 2 p.m., and 8 p.m., but they weren't there at 4 a.m., then they're considered a non-resident car. And the RPZ program has very precise requirements that are written into the municipal code for what qualifies. And what the RPZ study needs to find is a minimum of 20 contiguous block faces, you can go like that, but they have to touch, they can go around corners, that are at least 75% full of vehicles, and of those parked cars, at least 35% of those are non-resident vehicles. So, does that make sense? Okay. So here's what an RPZ could look like. This is what you all want to see. What we found, to give you an upfront idea, is that the area around California met those criteria. So what you're looking at here, this area that's shaded in yellow and orange, is what an RPZ could look like. And this is about 40 or 50 block faces. And it includes includes blocks we studied in the RPZ study, but not the commercial study. So we definitely divide those. We did find that other parts of the study area did not meet all of that criteria. There were a few what I call straggler blocks that were off in like corners that met it, but we would not put an RPZ. It wasn't contiguous. There weren't a sense of 20 contiguous blocks in those areas. So this area around, I like calling it instead of a cashew, is the area that qualified here for an RPZ. Same map here. So what could that look like? We could consider a Monday to Saturday RPZ with parking allowed for 2 hours between 7 a.m. and 6 p.m. for those without permits. And that's a pretty standard RPZ. An RPZ can exist on one side of the block or on both sides of a block. And so many neighborhoods in the city have RPZs that are just on one side of the block. And what that does is it helps balance out the demand on the public right-of-way. So it allows some non-residents to park all day, and it also reserves some parking the other side for residents. And what it also kind of avoids the everyone parking on the next block phenomenon, so it sort of smooths it out. And so a lot of RPZs have that, but not all of them. Some of them have parking on both sides. The other thing is that the RPZ signs would be on residential blocks that would be around the commercial area, and the signs are only installed directly adjacent to ground floor residential use. So if there's a mixed-use building that's on an RPZ block, the residents in that building would be eligible for the permits, but probably the ground floor retail would have 2-hour time limit signs. And sometimes there are breaks on an RPZ block. If there's an office or a church, we wouldn't put up the RPZ signs next to the church, nor would the church employees be eligible for those permits. And so if you drive around the city and look at RPZs, you'll see that many blocks in the city have both time limit and RPZ signs. A couple of things that were not under consideration is that we would not have late night evening restrictions in this RPZ. And I can show you some of the data, basically, that says that by 8 p.m., it's not warranted. It doesn't meet that criteria. The other thing is that we really are moving away from no parking except by permit restrictions. Last year in North Capitol Hill, we changed the evening restrictions that were existing in one of those zones and removed the overnight and just put it to, that one goes from 7 to 8 p.m. in Capitol Hill. And right now, actually, we are working in Wallingford and proposing that one of those zones that has no parking restrictions, just mostly south of 45th there, that actually be removed. So once again, I want to reiterate the RPC program does not manage demand between residents, and all residents on a block are eligible for the permits.
So Ruth, I'm sorry to interrupt,
Sure.
but
No.
So the parking restrictions would only be between 7 a.m. and 6 p.m.? Okay.
Most likely.
And then, so for the people coming home after 6 p.m., anybody can park after 6?
That's right.
If you have a permit, it's not going to help you?
That's right.
Okay.
So here's what we saw, in fact. So this is the data that is behind that. And so what we saw, basically, the way you read this, I've looked at it so much that I read it right easily, but there's 2 rows. There's a weekday row, and then there's a Saturday row. And the first column has the 4 a.m. occupancy. So that is the occupancy we saw on the blocks around California at 4 in the morning. So 64% on a weekday, 69% on a Saturday. And then at 10 a.m., the occupancy was up to 88%. So that's over 75. And I'm just talking about the weekday here, the non-resident percent was at 58%. So that's over the 35% non-resident. And then at 2 o'clock, again, it qualifies, but by 8 o'clock, the occupancy on those blocks was at 67%. And so that's not over the 75%. And therefore, it doesn't qualify at 8 p.m. The Saturday, it actually, you would expect that a Saturday, the non-resident percentage would be lower as residents tend to stay home. And so at 10 o'clock, in fact, the resident percentage, the non-resident percentage is 33%, but then it does creep up to 43 at 2 o'clock, and so that's why we could look at a Saturday RPZ that includes Saturdays in this neighborhood. I only have like a very few more slides, and then we can talk. So what this map is, and again, this presentation will be online tomorrow. This shows you the entire study area. So remember, we studied all those blocks, 172 blocks. And so basically, the blocks that are in red are the residential blocks that qualified. So you can see the C, the area that is contiguous around the business district. The blue blocks are commercial, and then the gray blocks are blocks that just did not qualify. So there is the block over there on 36 that does qualify, but it's all by itself. And then there's one down here on Hudson, but generally this is the area that qualifies. And then again, when you look at an average, now this is the data for the whole area, including Dakota and Dawson, the whole big area on an average, and I know we don't all live on an average block, but if you look at it all as an average, the average occupancies are in the mid-50%. And so that is what we found. On the weekend, and again, on the weekend here, basically the non-resident percent never went above 35% on an average, which makes sense on Saturdays.
You know, I was just wondering, it doesn't seem that it's that big of a problem when you look at the numbers.
You know, I think everyone has kind of different impressions of that, and there are definitely some very full blocks in there, and I would say if you live on that block, you might consider that, you know.
Right.
I live on one of those blocks. It is a problem, a huge, constant problem.
So here we are on next steps. We're sharing the results. We shared the results of the commercial area study with the Merchants Association. We're here tonight. We want to talk about the RPZ. We want to see what you think about it, what your initial thoughts are, and then we would do much broader outreach with the whole community, because this is not everyone that lives on those blocks, and we really want to get in touch with people and let them know. And then in the fall of 2018, we would propose some of the changes Jonathan was talking about, and then potentially an RPZ if that's where it goes. I think some, to be frank, some neighborhoods requested RPZs and then decided they didn't want them. That has happened recently, and then other neighborhoods are moving forward. So here we are. I want to give you a handout. I didn't want to give this to you while I was talking because you'd just be looking at it, right? So, because that's what we do. You want to, I better keep one.
Is this what you just showed?
This is a handout, so it's just a 2-pager, and no, it's not everything I just showed, but this will also be on the website. But it might help if, you know, you can like look more closely at the numbers as part of our discussion. And I will go back maybe to this slide.
It's one, it's just one, two-sided.
So we're looking for feedback, and I know just a lot of information just got sent to you know, for what you think of the proposed area, what you think about the one side of the block or not, and any other thoughts. And I can talk about the 2 permits. But do you have a different question?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Ruth, did you guys do a slide where you superimposed this over our initial requested RPZ area?
I don't have that slide, but there were 10 block faces. I looked at that did, right here. So 41st, between Alaska and Genesee. So 41st between Alaska, Oregon, and Genesee. 40th between Alaska and Oregon. And then Oregon itself, between 39th and 41st are the blocks.
Okay, so
So yes.
when I look at this,
Mhm.
it looks to me like, and I totally appreciate your study, I love it, you guys. It looks to me like, based on your data, quite a few of the blocks that we requested in our original RPZ application have fallen off of this. Is that right?
That's right.
Okay. So, the C line that you have driven there,
Mhm.
have drawn there, can you remind me what that is again?
It's the bus line.
The wrapped around C line.
That's the bus line,
Yeah,
okay.
We've heard, I don't know, comments about people parking and taking the
Yep.
bus.
Okay, so if the blocks that we originally requested that have dropped off, are the people on those streets just out of luck at this point? Or is there anything else that we can do to say, hey guys, we totally appreciate the study that you did, totally accept it, but we still have a congestion and density problem? Is there anything that we can do?
An RPZ wouldn't be proposed. So sometimes, and I don't know off the top of my head if all of those blocks have parking on both sides, but sometimes and often residents don't like to hear this, but actually can slow traffic down and add capacity. But sometimes, as long as the block is 25 feet wide, and neighbors agree, 60% of the neighbors agree, you can add parking back to the other side if it has no parking, and that actually doubles the capacity. So that's one thing that you can do to add more parking and also slow traffic down, because people can't race down a block. Yes.
So you can live like a block or two away from
I-
if you live like a block or two away from the zone,
Uh-huh.
and you don't buy a permit to park in the zone,
You cannot, no.
you know,
You have to live on the block where the signs are to buy the permit.
so all the addresses that
Hmm?
they're validated.
What?
So you verify those addresses.
Oh, yeah.
with,
The permit counters, you have to have the addresses entered in a computer system, and you apply, and you have to show that your vehicle is registered to that address, and then you can purchase a permit.
How is it decided, oh, sorry,
That's okay.
Go ahead.
You're good.
how is it decided that this will become or will not become in place?
It's starting tonight, right? We want to hear from people, and we know that this will go up on the blog, and then we can hear from more people. So, the process we've just gone through in Wallingford, one of the things we did was create like an online comment form, and we sent it to blogs. We put it on our blog. I think we've done enough mailings here that I don't know that we would do another mailing, but we've done flyers in the business neighborhood. We really do we've taken Facebook ads out. So we can create a survey that people can take and basically say, yes, I want this, no, I want this, I like this part, I want both sides of the block, one side of the block. To be completely honest with you, Green Lake got all the way up to a public hearing, and then it was an event, let me tell you, and people basically stood up and said, if this is what we want, then we don't want anything, and so we didn't do it. So, I mean, we really don't know where this is going right now. And I'm not saying that you don't want this, and you may very well want this, and we don't know if it would be one side of the block or two sides of the block. But I'm not exaggerating when I say that we have no outcome. We have no predetermined outcome here. We really don't. So, let me just, before I forget, talk about the 2 permits thing.
Yeah.
So there's been an RPZ policy review going on since 2015 that we've looked at the program, and frankly, it's kind of stalled. That is the truth. And so I don't know what's gonna happen with that. One of the things that we talked about there were limiting permits in some of the very dense neighborhoods, Capitol Hill. We find though really that it's not the number of 4, it's not like everyone goes and gets 4 permits. The places that tend to have 4 permits are often in southeast Seattle where there are multi-generational households and the zone is not very full anyway, and so sometimes people have, so most people in the city don't own 4 cars that are registered to their address.
Yeah, unfortunately, the renters next door to me have 4 cars.
They have 4 cars, okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
and it is a multi-generational
It
family,
is a
so,
multi-generational.
you know.
So it's talked about, I don't know where it's,
Okay, fair enough.
all right. Yes,
A couple of clarifying questions.
Sure.
And then a suggestion for your study for, as you go forward.
Okay.
This fall. So, permit is $65 for 2 years, and that's per permit,
it is.
okay? And you said that in a mixed-use setting, residents could apply for a permit. I'm assuming that is if they do not have parking allocated already in their building. They can have a parking spot in their building and a RPC permit.
Same as a resident who lives in a single-family house can have a garage or a driveway and still
Okay.
be eligible for a permit. It's,
Okay,
we don't look at that.
okay.
Yep.
Duly noted. On the process side of things, sort of to follow up on how you make the decision. I think one of the things that we've experienced as a community with MHA and giving feedback to the city is the wide open-ended nature of the comment forum have allowed voices from all over the city to weigh in on what it is that they would like to see West Seattle embrace with respect to MHA. Now, I don't live on a block that would fall into RPZ, and so I guess what I'm asking is how do you give voice to the people who would be directly affected as opposed to those of us on the outside of those blocks who don't live there and don't have to live with that decision?
Well, we try very hard to reach the people who live there and to reach you all who might live a block away, because it does impact, I think, you as well. And so,
Do you prioritize those voices who are directly impacted by the RPZ or in the adjacency area?
I think that if the people, let's say, who were proposed to be in the RPZ, and so we also have to have a public hearing. I should have said that earlier, but part of the process and required by the Seattle Municipal Code is that even after all this outreach and comment forums, we have to have a public hearing. And people come to the public hearing and they state their name and they talk for 2 minutes, and the council is not there, it's just us. But, and often people say, I live here, and we note it down, and I support this or I don't support this. And so I think what we would do on an online forum is we would say, like, do you live in the proposed area, yes or no? And then do you support this, yes or no? And it's not as safe as voting, like, one vote. I mean, we trust people to be telling the truth, that yes, they live there or they don't live there.
Sure.
And so I think we really do listen to what people are saying. So right now, in like I said, in Wallingford, it's very complicated what's going on. There's 3 different proposals. There's a potential new RPZ that's just to the west of I-5, and then there's the Zone 5 in the middle, and then there's another zone that's Zone 22. Anyway, there's 3 different zones, and so we literally created a comment form. It's like, which area do you live in, and what do you think? So, yes, nobody who lives in Ballard is going to have an impact on this for sure.
And then to sort of tag off on what my neighbor is saying here, in your process as you go forward modeling this for the fall, if we were in a steady state situation where wasn't too much growth one way or the other, you'd model it one way. But we are 111% over projection in the urban village for where we're supposed to be, or where the city thought we were supposed to be right now. And we know from the MHA study that the city projects 150,000 more in the city itself. What I would love to see you consider is how quickly the adjoining blocks, and especially the blocks that fell off or were the stragglers in the RPZ, are going to in fact fill up. I think it would be really worth your while to model that, because I suspect 10 years ago, it wouldn't have filled up nearly as quickly, but with the building that's going on and the density, we could be very well looking at another RPZ down the line. So I'd love to see you guys crunch those numbers and do some modeling around that.
So we would definitely look at land use and zoning. I will say that the requirements that Ruth talked about an RPZ are really reflective, or we have to measure what is going on today, conditions, like it's 75% full and 35% non-resident, so we're not going to project those numbers. It could be 5 years from now, if this doesn't go forward, there's a new RPZ request.
That's true, but you do know the conditions of the blocks on the outside that fell off as a result, and you do have city permit data, and you do have construction data, and you do have city population projections. And, you've forgotten more math than I will ever know around of this, so I trust you guys to do it. But I think it would be smart, because I suspect at a gut level that we're going to grow so fast that eventually those blocks are going to get filled in very quickly. And the spillover effect that you might have seen happening more slowly in a less growth-intensive time.
So I will say that they're, like I said, RPZ, they do expand, and they expand block by block. And so our residents can petition into a block, and we will go look at that block and see how full it is, and sometimes we don't even, good or bad, the non-resident thing doesn't fall into it quite as much, so residents can petition onto blocks, and that, if you've just watched the city, zones have expanded. So that is another way that but they'd have to go contiguously, that it, so it would be, this block and this block, that it's not like we just jump over there, but if RPZs can expand by petition in a contiguous fashion.
I think what I'm asking for is some
yeah,
intelligence coming back from you guys
Right.
to us to say, 3 years from now, you're probably going to need to be looking at this ring.
Well, I was going to ask, have you had other neighborhoods who had the need to add capacity to add on other blocks?
We have.
And what time, do you have to go through the same process of a study and a public hearing and the input to add a block to an existing RPZ?
Not
or is it-
one block. You can add, the code says you can add up to 2 blocks with the petition process at a time without having a public hearing.
Okay.
But we had a large section of Zone 2, which is at Cherry Hill near Madison that we filled in with a public hearing process 2 years ago? Something like that. With the public hearing process, and that was enough interest that we didn't do the petition. And so there could be that situation where things change and we come and do another study. So
it doesn't take a year to add a block?
it doesn't take a year to add 1 block, for sure.
Okay.
By petition, it doesn't take a year to add 1 block, but it could take a year once you do a study. If you want to add like 5 blocks or 10 blocks, I know.
Petitions 2 at a time is what you're saying.
But to be clear, based on this data, there's not a single 20 contiguous block face area
This
in.
This is it. This area this is contiguous. I know, you might not think it's contiguous, but
I
it
mean,
is.
based on your,
See, it
but I mean,
goes
there's lots of
knit,
gaps in
knit,
the-
knit, 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 knit. It goes around.
but your other diagram actually, qualified each block face. The one that has the red,
But
gray,
it actually,
blue
if you
lines.
look at the red lines, you can draw this.
Yeah, but I see a big gap across Genesee.
That
I
is
see
a bunch
it,
of
yeah.
that gap there, kind of on 42nd and 41st, I believe, are a bunch of churches and schools.
Oh, I
And so
see.
since it's a non-residential use, we get to jump over it.
Okay.
I know.
So contiguous is contiguous, but it has some
It has some
things that.
things, right.
Jump over, okay.
We got to jump over that.
So Ruth, if our blocks fell off of this after your study, is there information on your website that can help us petition?
Yes, but only first there has to be an existing RPZ. You can't
Gotcha.
petition to join an RPZ if the RPZ doesn't exist already.
Gotcha,
So,
thank you.
I think these people in the back, I haven't heard from.
Question, let's say you live on a block that is qualified. Now, you have to have everybody on that block vote for it, or how does that work?
No, we're in a bigger process than that right now. So we go through this whole outreach process and public hearing and gather a lot of comments and say, do people who live there want it or not? So then you don't really, if you are in the minority, then you don't want it, you're in the minority.
Thanks.
Yes.
I have a capacity question.
Uh-huh.
That between 40th and 41st in Alaska and Oregon, there's an alley. And in the alley, there's about 18 townhouses built behind the houses that face 40th and 41st. Those townhouses have addresses on 40th and 41st. So it seems to me that they would be eligible to get permits.
Yes.
Because of the density in that area, if everybody wanted a permit, or even half of the people wanted a permit, there's just not enough space for that.
There's what there is today, is the space. So, I mean, people are parking today. There would just be easier, it's easier for residents to find a permit if the commuters or employees can't park on those blocks. It doesn't guarantee a space, for sure. There could easily be more permits than there are spaces, and it's not, I mean, if you want a guaranteed space, then the best place to find that is off-street, and to choose to purchase the off-street space in your building or in some other building, and the city has tried to make that sharing possible. And
That's what I'm saying, that it's possible to buy a permit.
yes.
And there still not be a space for you.
Right. Yes. It is not a guaranteed space. We're running out of time.
So why don't we finish up with maybe one more question? So if you've got a really good question, is it you, Lisa?
I'm not sure if it's so good. It's a quick one. I was
Okay.
just curious, so you said at 4 a.m. you can assume who's
The residents.
yeah, but how are you determining non-residents at 10 a.m. and 2 p.m.?
If their cars don't match the license plates, we do like fancy VLOOKUPs and spreadsheets. So the license plates are all good. This is a 4 a.m. column of license plates, and if the license plate at 10 o'clock, 2 o'clock, and 8 o'clock was never on that 4 o'clock, that's a non-resident.
Gotcha, okay.
We do look to see if they parked on a different block.
Yeah, you can move. You can. It's not like we just look by block. The
Gotcha.
residents can move, and they're still on the big 4 a.m. list. And then we don't save any of that data or look up anything. I just want people to know we're not looking things up, license plate.
So Jonathan and Ruth, just one quick suggestion or request is, can you guys please superimpose this over our original application streets?
Sure.
Just to give us a
Yes.
clear idea
Okay.
of what fell off
Yep.
and what got added.
Okay.
That would be really helpful, thank you.
Yes, we can do that. We'll get that back.
I would like to just say thank you for doing
Oh.
this.
Yeah.
Thank you. Totally.
I've been trying for 6 years to get this, so I'm really grateful.
Yeah, and are you on a block there that's
44th
in the orange?
and over, yeah.
Good deal.
So Ruth and Jonathan, as you have more information about where people can comment, or
Yes.
they'll complete surveys, and any kind of public hearing,
Oh, yes.
pass that information along to me, and I'll be sure to share it with our listserv. So if you've signed in tonight and your email address is on there, or if you received emails already, then you'll receive a